I should begin by making a confession. I don't vote. People think they should vote because they've been told that in school, and there's a large volume of propaganda at any given point in time. A great many of them are under delusions as to the importance of their vote. They think that their vote makes a lot of difference, but as a matter of fact, it doesn't.
The fact that Gordon Tullock refuses to vote doesn't stop 115 million other Americans from casting their ballots in national elections. Still, this seems like an irrational choice from an otherwise rational man. So is the act of voting rational?
It's usually said that it's more likely you'll be killed on the way to driving to the polling booth than that your vote will change the outcome.
The recurring theme of most pro-voting rhetoric is that you should vote because your vote makes a difference in shaping the outcome of the election. But some economists see casting your ballot to shape the outcome of an election as irrational. In fact, they find the strongest reasons to vote have nothing to do with the outcome at all. Let's start with some simple math, a renowned public choice theorist, and this economic model to answer this question. Studying people is tricky business. There's tons of people out there, all with different jobs and ethnicities and personalities, and if you want to make big sweeping statements about why people make certain choices, you have to simplify things a lot. First, forget individual preferences. To make things easy, economists assume we all want one thing: happiness. We want as much of it as possible while expending the least amount of effort. Then they apply this formula to everything we do, even voting. This is why economists view voters in an election much like shoppers at a supermarket.
Basically what happens is we assume that the voter is attempting to maximize his preference function.
That's econo-speak for happiness.
Just as we assume he's attempting to maximize his preference function when he walks into a store. The only difference is the thing that he sees is different.
So when we're shopping and when we're voting, we're making decisions based on cost-benefit analysis. The cost of spending time and money at the supermarket is worth it because of the much greater benefit of having food. So if we look at voting the same way, the cost of losing leisure time by going to the polls and standing in line is only worth it if the benefits are greater or equal to the costs. So if you're voting to affect the outcome of an election, the benefit of voting would be the amount of difference your vote makes, and if you looked at things like Tullock does, that wouldn't be very much. Tullock's argument for not voting relies on a type of mathematics called division, and it works like this. Here's how much your individual vote actually matters. Let's say I go to the supermarket with two buddies and buy some frozen pizza. We decide to vote on what type of pizza to get. Using division, you can see I hold 1/3 of the voting power. That's huge. My vote has a big impact on the final decision. In fact, in a split decision, I'm the swing voter. My vote determines the outcome. However, if this supermarket worked like an election, things would be different and a whole lot more crowded. Now it's not just the three of us deciding on frozen pizza, it's us and the Schmitz next door, the Frankels down the block, the Robinsons, and everyone else in our state. That's thousands, maybe even millions of people all making a decision on frozen pizza. Let's divide again. In this scenario, we see that my vote is basically insignificant. Also in an election, a candidate gets picked whether you vote or not. It's as if pizzas are delivered to you no matter what. You could go to the supermarket and vote pepperoni, or you could stay at home and wait. You'd still get a pizza either way. Basically, the decision gets made whether you vote or not. Now there is a great incentive not to bother and just take a free ride. Ultimately, as the number of people voting increases, there's less and less probability that you'll affect the outcome of the election. So even if the costs to you as an individual are relatively small, the benefits of voting to you as an individual are vastly smaller. And this is precisely why Tullock doesn't vote.
The reason I don't vote is because I know that there's no likelihood my vote will affect the outcome because there's so many people voting.
With that rationale, how can democracy and its institutions be defended? How do we tackle the looming quandary of why to vote? Well, how about this? Voting is a luxury good. Until recently, few people had it, and even now, many people want it. Voting is valuable because like gold or diamonds or salty sturgeon eggs served in a crystal bowl, it's a rare and valuable commodity. Even in America, one of the oldest surviving democracies, you don't have to go back more than 150 years to cut the number of people allowed to vote by a huge percentage. The ability to vote is what makes a democracy a democracy. To maintain the right to vote, you must exercise this right.
Because democracy depends on the votes. It depends on the votes because without it, if we all stopped voting, the president would be a dictator.
In economic terms, with voting, you are getting something that is extremely rare at a negligible cost. If your happiness comes from shaping the election, you're bound to be disappointed. But what if your happiness comes from something else entirely? The ability to exercise your right to vote. Although democracy has its problems, it's the best form of government compared to all the others. Since living in a democracy is something precious, not taking care of this precious thing is sort of like borrowing your friend's original Picasso and using it as a placemat. Ethically shady. So let's say you vote because you believe you have a moral obligation to maintain democracy. The costs remain the same, but the benefits are much greater. No matter how you divide it up, the benefit to each individual of maintaining the right to vote is still significant. It may sound fanatical that you vote to uphold democracy, but that's actually a rational choice. And while it seems normal to vote because you want to affect the outcome of the election, it's actually irrational to do so. Ultimately, voting is a good thing. Even Tullock, who doesn't vote, agrees with that. There's nothing inherently rational or irrational about the act of voting. It is the reasons why we choose to vote that determine its rationality.
I think a great many voters just like voting. And that, of course, is a benefit if they feel that way. As it happens, I don't.